Homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. I am here today to talk to you about soap making, and soap making specifically as it pertains to the homestead, because you can make soap out of any oil out there. Anything you can imagine, you can make soap out of. If it is saponified oils, it will get you clean. It may not feel great on your skin. It may not do exactly what you want it to do, but it will clean you. But when you're on a homestead, you tend to have a lot of oils that are from animals. You might have a lot of lard because you raise pigs. You might have a lot of tallow because you raise beef, or maybe you buy a beef every year. Maybe you buy a pig every year, or you might raise goats and you can render down goat tallow, or you might be a hunter and you have a lot of tallow that is from either venison, which is deer, or from elk. And you can make soap out of all of those oils. It's a great thing to do on the homestead to be able to make soap from the oils that you have readily available. But I want to give you some hints and tips and tricks around that, because just because you can make soap out of any oil doesn't mean that single oil soaps are really all that great. And if you want them to have both a really lovely lather and a really nice feeling of cleansing, but not so drying that it's going to strip your skin, and to leave a little bit of conditioning on your skin, have a nice hard bar that isn't going to soak up water in the shower and just get really super goopy and yucky, or leave a really slimy feel on your skin, you get there by using a combination of oils rather than a single oil. And so I wanted to chat with you about that. At the end of this video, I will leave you a recipe for both a lard recipe for soap and a tallow recipe for soap. And again, if you wanted to do the calculations, you could do those with 100% lard or 100% tallow. But my guess is you're probably not going to love the way it feels. But I will give you base recipes for those two things. I'm not going to show you how to render those oils. There's lots of great videos on that, and I don't happen to have any fats available right now to do the rendering. I just have a lot of already rendered oils. So I'm not going to show you that part of it. It's not difficult. But let's get started talking about soap making. I have been a soap maker since 2005. I always joke that I think there's 3 things, maybe 4 things that are kind of like the gateway to all things homesteading. One of them is getting chickens, of course. We all know that one. One of them is learning how to make your own bread at home from scratch. Incredibly empowering, and definitely helps you rely less on the grocery store for many of your needs. One of them is learning how to make yogurt from dairy. That's a really kind of basic homestead skill that a lot of people learn. And then the other one is learning how to make soap. And so this was just part of my regular homesteading journey. Actually, when I was in college, I took organic chemistry and as part of my degree, and one of the labs that we did in organic chemistry was actually soap making. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just following the directions. We ended up with soap. I remember asking the lab assistant if I could take it home and use it, and he said, no, it'll burn your skin off. I didn't really understand why, but it seemed weird to me that we made soap and then we couldn't actually do anything with it. And that was because with that chemical reaction in that lab class, we were trying to react exactly the amount of sodium hydroxide that we had, which is the lye, with exactly the amount of oils that we had. And I don't remember what oils we were using. And so we didn't have any extra cushion for error, which is why he said it would probably burn my skin off. Because if that calculation is slightly off, you can end up with something that's pretty alkaline and pretty irritating to the skin. So I knew the basic process of soap making, but I didn't really understand it. But I had done it in a very small micro amount. And so 2005, I figured out, wait, I could make soap at home. This would be really fun. And I was kind of in this world at the time of like learning how to make a lot of things from scratch that I had been buying at the store. And so I was interested in making my own laundry detergent. I was interested in making my own toothpaste. I was interested in making my own deodorant. I wanted to know how to make lotion and lip balm. So I was definitely deep in the rabbit hole and wanted to learn how to make soap. So I bought a book on soap making. I'll put the picture of it up here. This is a kind of a classic soap book. A lot of people have learned how to make soap using this book. It's a little dated at this point, but this was the book that I had. And so I understood the basic process from reading the book. And I can't remember if it was before or after that I found the Miller's Homemade Soap Making page. And this is 2005, so this is kind of early internet days when a lot of this stuff was available. And she just had recipe after recipe after recipe after recipe, tons of different recipes. And they were all based on, at the time, You could buy lye at the hardware store, Red Devil lye at the hardware store, and the recipes were all sized to use up an entire canister of the lye that you bought at the hardware store. And it turns out that makes a huge amount of soap. And so I still have my notes from the first recipe for soap that I ever made. And thankfully it worked. It came out and I ended up with soap. I way under fragranced it because I had no information on how to use fragrances. And I was really worried that I was going to over fragrance it and that was going to be bad for my health and for my skin. And so I ended up way under fragrancing it because I didn't have good information on how much fragrance to put in it. But I made a gigantic batch of soap. It came out well. I gave it to everybody for Christmas. We used it, and I think it was probably maybe another 2 years before I made soap again because I had so much soap from the first batch. But it came out well. It was a success. And so after that, like once a year, I would make a batch of soap, play around with some different oils, different recipes, and give it for Christmas gifts and that kind of thing. Somewhere around 2010, I was living up north of Spokane, and I had a lot of time on my hands due to some various circumstances, and I got into the Yahoo soap making group at the time. This is, again, kind of early internet days before there were Facebook groups. And I learned a ton of information on that Yahoo soap making group starting in 2010. And so my soap making went from I'm following somebody else's recipe, I'm doing exactly what they tell me to do, and it's coming out, to starting to really understand what those different oils did, how to come up with my own recipe, how to use an online soap calculator to calculate how much lye I needed for the particular recipe that I was using, changing out various things, the effect of water in a recipe, and what that did, how long to cure soap, and did you really need to cure soap for 4 to 6 weeks before you could use it because it was going to burn your skin off if you didn't, or was curing really just about water evaporation and that bar of soap getting hard. So I learned a ton of stuff, and it was about that time that I started to get interested in doing farmers markets. And so when I did my first farmers markets up in the Spokane area in 2011, I love that my neighbor is weed whacking right now because perfect timing. So 2011, I started doing farmers markets, and I brought some of the soap that I had made because it was early in the season. We're talking May. I didn't have a lot of produce yet because it was still really early. I had a little bit of lettuce and some spinach, but not much else. And I thought I'll just put the soap on the table as a way of kind of padding the produce that I had. And over the years, that ended up really taking off. And so for a long time, I did farmers markets for 9 years. During that 9 years, the soap making was always more than 50% of my business. And there is no better way to really get good at something than to do it over and over and over and over again. So I have made literally probably 500 batches of soap at least, and literally thousands of bars of soap. Ironically, I just made a batch of soap that I filmed for this video that was a 70% lard soap, and I didn't do it correctly. It was safe in terms of the recipe, but I didn't get the temperature quite right, and I ended up not liking that batch of soap, and so I ended up remaking it later. You'll see videos from both of those batches of soap. But yeah, you get used to the recipe that you land on once you play around with a bunch of things and figure out exactly what you want, and then you just make that over and over and over again and how it behaves. And so yeah, it turns out when you change things up a lot, things go sideways. So you can keep learning and keep making mistakes even when you've been making soap for almost 20 years. But a few things about soap making. So what's happening when we actually make soap? You're taking sodium hydroxide, which is the lye, and you're mixing it with different kinds of oils, and there's a chemical reaction that's going on where the hydroxide is actually cutting that oil molecule apart, and it's separating those fatty acids. Oils are made up of fatty acids, and so it's separating out those fatty acids and reacting with them and recombining. And what you're getting is a molecule of glycerin, which is lovely on the skin and hydrating on the skin. It attracts moisture, and a soap salt. And a soap salt is different from the oil that you started with because you've actually changed the chemical composition of that oil at this point. But a soap salt is the part that actually cleans. And it's the stuff that will surround a dirt molecule because one end is hydrophilic, one end is hydrophobic, and it surrounds that little dirt molecule and then allows it to be washed away. So that's the actual chemical reaction that's happening when you mix lye with oils. Temperature affects this. How much water you have affects this. How much agitation you have affects this. Whether or not you're adding fragrances affects this. How much fragrance you add, the types of fragrance you add. There are certain essential oils and fragrances that can actually slow down that chemical reaction, and there's others that will speed it up. And so there's lots of different things that will subtly affect all of this, but that's the basic reaction that's happening. And if you're speeding it up or slowing it down, it's still the same chemical reaction. It's just happening faster or it's happening slower. So your lye needs to be sodium hydroxide, not potassium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide is what's used for making liquid soaps. So make sure that you get sodium hydroxide, not potassium hydroxide. And it needs to be 100% sodium hydroxide. And you used to be able to get that really easily at a hardware store. Red Devil lye used to be available at all hardware stores, and you could just go to a hardware store and buy a container of lye. It turns out lye is also used for making methamphetamines, and so for a long time, all of the hardware stores just pulled it off their shelves because they didn't want to deal with the liability. And then for a while, even ordering it online, you had to make sure that they had all of your contact information. I order my lye from a company called Essentials Depot. And Essential Depot they're out of Florida, and they're a funky little company. They strike you when you look at the website and all of the kind of stuff that they're trying to sell you as a little bit of a multi-level marketing company. But price-wise, because I'm buying lye in bulk, they've always been able to beat everybody else in price, and so that's where I buy my lye. But most soap-making supply companies, so Brambleberry, Nature's Garden, Nurture Soapmaking, Wholesale Supplies Plus, those guys are all probably going to sell lye as well. So you can buy it online if you can't find it in your local hardware store. But if you are buying it in your local hardware store, just be sure that it says 100% lye, because a lot of the drain cleaners that are out there that are marketed as lye actually have other things in them as well. So that's important. What kind of oils do you use? The trinity of soap making oils is coconut, palm, and olive oil, or coconut, tallow, and olive oil, or coconut, lard, and olive oil. That's called the trinity of soap making. And each one of those three oils has a different role to play in that bar of soap, and that's why all three of them are there. Coconut oil is very cleansing. It's very good at cleaning your skin, and it also has a really great bubbly lather. And so if you love a really great soapy bubbly lather, coconut oil is what's going to do that. However, if you have too much coconut oil, it is such a good cleanser that it is just going to strip your skin of all of its natural oils and dry you out. And so I generally don't do more than 25% coconut oil in any kind of a soap recipe. And you can go, I would say, as low as 15%. 15 to 25% coconut oil by weight is usually a good place to start. But coconut oil is high in lauric and myristic acid. And lauric acid in particular is going to give you that great lather. The other substitute for coconut oil, if for whatever reason you have an allergy to coconut, is palm kernel oil. Palm kernel oil is different from palm oil, so be sure that you're getting palm kernel, but it's very similar in terms of its fatty acid makeup, in terms of giving you that great lather. So you can do a no coconut bar of soap with palm kernel oil instead of coconut. The lard, the tallow, or the palm oil, those are going to give you hardness, and so they tend to be high in palmitic acid, stearic acid, myristic acid, lauric acid a little bit, but mostly palmitic and stearic acid, and those are going to give you a nice hard bar of soap. And by hardness, I don't just mean knock on wood hardness. No, hey, that was me. It's okay. My dogs are idiots. Palmitic or stearic acid is going to make a nice hard bar of soap, not just in terms of like knock on wood hard, but also in terms of how easily it absorbs water. And you want a happy medium here where it's going to absorb some water so that you can actually, lather it up and make a nice lather with your soap. But if it's super soft and it absorbs water super easy, it's just going to be super goopy in soap dishes and super goopy in your shower and make a huge mess. And so you need some of those oils that are going to bring hardness to the party in order to have a nice hard bar of soap that's going to last a long time in your shower. And so there's a lot of controversy around palm and whether or not we should be using palm. I'm not going to get into that. I think there's pros and cons to that argument. And you can get palm that's organic. You can get palm that's certified cruelty-free in terms of how it's being harvested. Or you can just choose not to use it at all. For vegans, they don't want to use animal products. And so tallow or lard is not really an option for them. And so palm is really the alternative. Basically, oils that are nice and hard at room temperature. The other oil that goes into this, the classic is olive oil, but you can use other oils besides olive oil if you want to. Rice bran oil is very nice. Sunflower oil can be good, but those are going to bring conditioning to the party. And so they're going to give you a nice conditioning skin feel and leave a nice layer of conditioning on your skin that is going to keep your skin from being super dried out. I do love olive oil. Olive oil has gotten more and more expensive as we get more and more into climate change and we have more droughts and more issues. Olive oil is getting a lot more expensive to use in soaps. The one thing that I would tell you is that soaps that are high in linoleic acid, and that would be safflower oil, sunflower oil, grapeseed oil, hemp oil, corn oil, soybean oil, all of those are high in linoleic acid. They tend to have a fairly short shelf life in soap. And what happens is whenever we're making soap, we always have a little bit of an excess of oils to what we need to react with the lye. And that's for a bunch of different reasons. One, it's to, just in case our measuring is slightly off, our scale is slightly off. And by the way, when you're making soap, you always use a scale. It's always by weight. It is never by volume. If you find a recipe that is by volume instead of by weight, do not use it. This is a chemical reaction. It needs to be done with an actual scale and not by volume. But if your measurements are a little bit off, that can throw off the calculations and leave you with a slightly lye heavy soap. Or what's called the sap value, the saponification value, which is the for every single oil out there, there's a saponification value that tells you how much lye you need to react to that particular oil. That saponification value is an average, and your oils are actually going to vary a little bit based on the year that they were harvested, how they were harvested, what was going on in terms of how they were processed. And so different things can affect that sap value a little bit one way or the other. And by doing what's called superfatting, which is adding about 5% more oils than what you think you need in order to react with the lye, that is going to give you coverage. So that way, if your measurements are slightly off or if your oil is a little funky and you don't realize it and there's no way for you to know that, you're going to be covered. You're always going to have an excess of oil, and it leaves a nice little bit of extra conditioning on your skin, and that's a nice thing as well. But oils that are high in that linoleic acid, what happens is that excess oil that didn't react with the lye is still floating around in the soap as an oil molecule, and it doesn't have a long shelf life. And so they tend to start to go rancid, and they give you what in the local colloquialism for soap makers is called DOS, or dreaded orange spots. And basically you'll have a bar of soap and it'll start to develop these little circles that are orange, and that is the excess oil in that soap starting to turn rancid. Grapeseed oil, sunflower oil, and hemp are notorious for this. They have maybe a 6-month shelf life, and so I don't recommend using those oils in soap making. They are fairly inexpensive, and so it's really tempting to do that. And certainly you could. There's certainly no reason that you couldn't if you thought your family was going to use up that bar of soap fairly quickly, or that batch of soap fairly quickly. But if you've got soap that you don't know how long it's going to sit on somebody else's shelf, you're giving it for Christmas gifts, you don't want it to start to go rancid. And part of the thing with that rancidity is not only do you see it with those dreaded orange spots, but you actually can usually smell it. It starts to smell really funky. I once made a test batch of soap where I was testing a theory about some essential oils and how essential oils stick, and a lot of rigmarole in the soap making world about what you should do to help your scent stay in the soap. And so I had some extra old shea butter that I had extra, and I thought I'm just going to do 100% shea butter soap because I need to use this shea butter up, and this is just a test batch that's just going to get tossed anyway. I'm not selling it. Turned out my shea butter was right on the edge of going rancid. I'd had it for quite a while. I didn't realize that, and I made the soap. It was fine for the first couple of weeks that it was curing, and then I ended up mailing these samples out to a bunch of different people so that people could smell them and give me their impressions of whether one thing worked or another thing worked. It was kind of this fun experiment that we were doing, and that soap was nasty within a month. It had gone so rancid that nobody could actually smell the scent that we were trying to smell because the oil had gone off and it just stunk. So just be aware, oils that are high in linoleic acid are not recommended to use in soap, or if you want to use them in soap, I usually say stay under 10% in terms of your total amount of oils of that particular oil. How do I know when a soap is high in palmitic or high in linoleic? etc., etc. There is an incredible resource online called SoapCalc, and there's a bunch of other soap calculators out there probably that do some similar kind of things, but I've literally been using SoapCalc for 15 years. And one of the best kept secrets of SoapCalc that people don't realize is down at the bottom of the screen, there's a place where you can sort all the oils that are in their database by any of the different fatty acid profiles or by what hardness it brings. You can sort by saponification value. There's lots of different ways of looking at that. You can also just, when you're doing the actual calculation, if you click on an individual oil, it will give you the entire fatty acid makeup over on the left side of the screen. And so you can see what percentages of each fatty acid are in a particular bar. So SoapCalc is invaluable if you're wanting to do your own recipes. It's also invaluable if you're double checking somebody else's recipe. So even for the ones that I'm going to post below, always, always, always take somebody else's recipe that you found on the internet or in a book that you think you want to try and plug them into a soap calculator and just double check that that lye amount is correct, because you don't want a soap that has an excess of lye in it. So safety around using lye. I think that using lye is what keeps people from going down the rabbit hole and learning how to make their own soap. It's kind of like using a pressure cooker. People are terrified of it. And the reality is, yeah, it could seriously injure you, particularly around your eyes. You do not want to get sodium hydroxide in your eyes. It can burn your eyes and really mess up your vision. So you need to wear safety goggles. You need to wear gloves. That said, I have been making soap for almost 20 years. And in that time, I've gotten, occasional little drops of raw soap batter on my skin or a drop of lye on my skin. And generally what happens is after a little bit of time, sometimes you don't even realize it's happened, it starts to sting. And you immediately look down and you see it and you go, oh, I've got that on my skin. And you go to the sink and you start rinsing it with water and you just rinse it until it's really, really clear and problem is over. So it's not like it's an acid that is going to eat through you like in Aliens with the dripping acid eating through the floor plates on the ship. It's not quite as dramatic as what you probably saw in Fight Club. So yes, use all kinds of safety gear. Be careful, and especially if you have little kids or a lot of pets that want to jump up on counters and things like that, it's better to be in a well-ventilated area. It's better to be in a place that you can close doors so that kids and pets can't get into the room when you're making your soap, but it is not insanely risky. And for years and years and years, because I was just making small batches, once or twice a year, when I mixed my lye, I would just bring it outside. And like today, I'm out on my back deck. There's a little bit of a breeze. I would figure out which way the air was coming to be at my back, and I would mix the lye with the water on my back deck with the breeze behind me so that it was blowing the fumes away from me. Now, when I mix my lye, I mix it up in my commercial kitchen, and I have a lid that I put on the container. The reaction of lye and water is exothermic, meaning it generates heat, and so it's going to generate some fumes and some steam. And so you don't want to breathe that. That is definitely nasty and can do damage to your lungs if you take a nice big deep breath of that. And so you want to stir it and then immediately try to cool it down by putting it in a sink full of cool water and put a lid on it so that those fumes are not going everywhere. But honestly, don't be afraid of the lye. Just be careful, be cautious, be aware, measure carefully, and try not to spill it. But it's not as horrific and terrifying as a lot of people think it is. You can do hard things. It's going to be okay, I promise. When you're mixing your soap and when you're mixing your lye, it's best not to use glass. Lye will etch glass over time, and you can end up with tiny hairline fractures or hairline scores. If you've ever watched anybody break glass by scoring it first, that's basically what's happening. And you can just nudge something and suddenly it shatters. And so it's not recommended that you mix your lye in glass. I've done it and I did it for a while. I have some measuring cups that to this day are a little bit etched from mixing lye in them, and they're still holding up and they've never broken because I didn't know any better. But it's best not to use glass. It's also absolutely, you should not use anything that's aluminum. If you're unsure of whether your pots are aluminum or not, take a magnet and see if it sticks to it. Magnets won't stick to aluminum. And so aluminum pots are a hard no. They react chemically with the lye, and it's a huge mess, so don't use aluminum. You can use stainless steel. I just had an online debate with somebody about this because she was saying you absolutely shouldn't use stainless steel, and I said I've been soaping for 20 years and I've been involved in soap making groups for almost that period of time, and I have literally never heard anybody say not to use stainless steel. Her argument was different levels of stainless steel, because there's different grades, that you can sometimes have issues if it's a cheap grade of stainless steel. I think for the home soap maker who's occasionally going to make a batch of soap every couple of months, it is not going to be an issue to use stainless steel. I have literally been soaping in stainless steel for the entire time that I have made soap in the last 20 years. I do not think stainless steel is an issue, but the other option is a number 2 or a number 5 plastic. And so you know how you turn over the bottom of the plastic jug and it has the little recycling symbol with a 5 or with a 2, most of which is completely useless for actually recycling that plastic, but it does give you an idea of what it's made out of. Most food grade buckets are number 5 plastic, and those are fantastic for mixing soap. You can go to the dollar store and get into their kitchen section and find number 5 plastic, because a lot of times if you're making small amounts of soap at home, you don't need big containers. And so you can just find, small little mixing containers or bowls that are number 5 plastic, and those work perfectly fine. In terms of fragrancing your soap, the general rule of thumb is anywhere from a half an ounce to an ounce of fragrance per pound of oils in your recipe. So if you're making a 1 pound batch of soap with 1 pound of oils, it's going to be more than that because of the lye and the water that gets added. But 1 pound of oils, you're going to want to use 0.5 or a half an ounce, which would be about a tablespoon, to an ounce, which would be about 2 tablespoons of fragrance in that soap. There's a lot more to that in terms of using essential oils, in terms of using fragrance oils. There's something called the IFRA, which is the International Fragrance Regulations, something that will give you specifics. I'm not going to go into all of that, but just know, buy fragrances specifically from a company that sells them for soap making. That's generally a good rule of thumb. And if they also sell fragrances for candles, make sure that the fragrance that you're buying is specifically for soap making and not for candles. There are fragrances that are really not safe in soap. They're not safe for on the skin, or they just behave very, very badly in soap. I once bought some fragrance at a D-stash from another maker, and she had been using it in, I can't even remember, liquid soap, something else, something that wasn't bar soap. And she's like, I have no idea how these are going to react. And they reacted terribly, both of them. I had 2 different ones, and they were both very, very poorly behaved in soap. So just if you buy stuff from a reputable supplier, and I'll put a link to my favorite suppliers down in the description below, generally they're going to be safe for soap and you're going to be fine. If you want it lightly scented, a tablespoon per pound of oils is going to be plenty for you. Or if this fragrance is particularly strong, if you want it heavily, heavily scented, you can usually go up to an ounce per pound, and it's going to be particularly strong. Know that citrus scents, so everybody loves orange and lemon and bergamot. Bergamot is actually a citrus. A lot of people don't realize that. Grapefruit, those are all top notes, and they do not hold well in soap. They tend to flash off over time, and so they might smell really great the day that you cut the soap, but by the time the soap is cured and it's ready to use, it hardly has any scent left. That's just the nature of citrus. And so just know that going in. Lavender is everybody's favorite, and you can definitely use an ounce of lavender per pound of oils in your soap. By the way, that's going to be fairly expensive. Usually fragrance is the most expensive part of making soap, and you don't have to include any fragrance at all. You can just leave it out and it'll smell clean and smell like soap, and it's going to be fine. So you don't have to have fragrance, obviously, but it is a lot of times everybody's favorite thing. You can use pretty much anything as a mold. Silicone works great, and so if you've got silicone muffin tins or silicone bread molds or those kind of things, again, dollar store is a good source for these kind of things. I've seen people make really large batches of soap in a dresser drawer that was lined. I've seen people use a shoebox, and you can make your own. And so if you're handy, or if you've got somebody in your life that is handy, you can just cut pieces of wood and make your own soap molds, you do need to line them. And so generally you can line them either with plastic trash bags, just cut those open and line the inside so that the soap doesn't leak everywhere, or butcher paper also works, and I still use butcher paper to line some of my molds to this day. Silicone soap molds that are specifically designed for that are fantastic, and one of the best purchases I ever made as a soap maker are the current silicone molds that I use right now that make 18 bars at a time. Just know that anything that you're using in terms of soap making, whether it's your containers or your stir sticks or your immersion blender or your molds, they are going to absorb fragrance. It's not going to be to the point where it's going to mess up the next batch of soap because there's still fragrance in there from the last batch of soap. That's going to be pretty minor, but you're not going to want to use a silicone spatula to scrape out your soap into the mold, wash it, and then go use it on cake batter. It will absorb fragrance and release it in other things. If you have a bread pan, silicone bread pan that you're going to use for soap making, that is your dedicated soap making mold. Do not use it for other things later because it will absorb fragrances, so just know that. But you don't have to spend a lot of money on molds. You can pretty much improvise with almost anything. Start your batches small. I usually recommend people use 1 to 2 pounds of oils for their first couple of batches of soap, partly because one, you might mess it up and it might not work out the way you want it to. It might be lye heavy. It might just turn out to be a mix of oils that you don't particularly care for. It's too drying on your skin. It's too soft. It's whatever. You don't want to spend a ton of money, $20 or $30 worth of fancy oils like shea butter, etc., on something that you don't really even know if you like or not. So small batches are easier and you have a lot less skin in the game. So I highly recommend doing small batches. The soap making reaction, the actual chemical reaction, it's just starting when you pour that soap into the mold. So when you get soap to what's called trace, which is when it starts to thicken up, that's the very beginning of that soap making reaction. It's not the end of it. But within 24 to 48 hours, that soap making reaction is finished. And so theoretically, that soap is safe to use at that point. You could take a 48-hour bar of soap and get it wet and lather up and wash with it in the shower. It would be super soft. It would absorb all kinds of moisture from the way you were using it, and it wouldn't last very long, but it would be safe on your skin. Most of the cure time that you have for soap, which is usually 4 to 6 weeks, is about evaporation. There are some other things that are happening in terms of the crystallization structure of the soap, salts, etc., etc. I won't get deep in the weeds on that, but most of it is just evaporation. So all that water that you put in when you were mixing everything together, that's what's called a catalyst. It's helping the lye and the oils react and mix together, but it's not actually part of the actual reaction. And so it's just water, and it's still in there when you pour it into the mold, and it's still in there when you cut the bars, and some of it is still in there even after it's been cured for 4 to 6 weeks. But that water evaporation is part of what's going to give you a hard bar of soap. And so, and honestly, I have soap sometimes that is a couple of years old. For whatever reason, it didn't sell, or it, got stuck somewhere, and I just get it out. And old soap, as long as it isn't rancid, is fantastic. It is like so lovely on the skin and has a wonderful lather, and it's hard as heck, and it lasts forever. And so old soap is generally good soap. However, old soap usually also means that the scent that you used has faded over time. And so that's the trade-off in terms of how long you should cure it for. And then also, obviously, if you're production soap making like I am, I don't have a ton of room to store, hundreds of bars of soap for 6 months. And so I need to be able to turn over my inventory and make new stuff as it's selling so that I'm not sitting on stuff for a really long period of time. The amount of water that you use in that soap recipe is somewhat arbitrary. And so you'll be reading a recipe and it'll give you, exact amount of water in grams, exact amount of lye in grams. And it feels like it's really, really important that that water be exactly what was in the recipe as it was written. That actually, if you think of it as a percent of the lye, and so a 1-to-1 water and lye would be a 50% lye solution. As long as you have 50% lye, 50% water, or a 1-to-1 lye solution, you have enough water in order for that soap making reaction to occur. However, it is going to go wicked fast, and you run the risk that it is not going to get fully mixed before it is too thick to stir and it needs to go into a mold. And so generally we don't make soap with a 1-to-1 lye and water solution. We add a bunch more water in addition to that. I tend to do anywhere from a 30 to a 35% lye solution. And most original recipes and the default, I think, for soap calc is somewhere around 26 or 27% lye solution, which is quite a bit more water. I like to use a little bit less water because, one, it does react a little bit faster, and also because it just cures faster. If I have less water in to start with, I need to let it cure for less time in order for it to evaporate back off again. So just know that that water number as you're doing all of your weights and measurements is not quite as critical as the other measurements that you're doing. I will, on the recipes that I do below, I will default to 30% water, which I think is a nice amount. One of the other things that happens with soap is something called soda ash, and it tends to be a reaction of the water, the lye, and the fragrance, where you get this fine dusting of weird ash on the surface of the soap where it interacted with the air, and so it has to do with oxygen as well. I find that if you have a little bit less water in the reaction, you have generally less ash as well, and so that's the other reason that I don't use quite as much water as traditional recipes. The entire time that I have been making soap, I have been making soap on a septic system. I've made soap in 3 different places, and all 3 of them have been on septic systems. I have never had any damage to my septic system because I was a soap maker, even when I was doing a lot of production soap making and making soap on a regular basis. The big thing is, just like with regular sewers in general, don't put oils down your drain. Try to use up everything that you're going to use. Scrape out your containers really well. And if you're not opposed to it because you think it's wasteful, use paper towels to wipe things out and throw the paper towels in the trash rather than just running all of that excess soap and oil and lye down your sink. But you'll notice in this video, I'm very careful about, I use a rubber spatula, I'm scraping everything out really well, so I try not to leave very much residue behind. And literally 20 years of soap making, I've never had any issues with my septic system, so be aware of that. And then lastly, there is no one perfect soap recipe for everybody. I've always joked that if you give 10 soap makers the exact same ingredients, we will all come up with different bars of soap. And one of them might be better for you, and one of them might be better for me. Different skins are different, and so different people just have different preferences. And so you have to kind of play around and make some different batches. My general rule of thumb is 25% coconut or palm kernel if you can't do coconut, 25% palm oil or lard or tallow, and then the rest olive oil. So 50% olive oil, 25% coconut, 25% palm. Again, that trinity of oils, that is a really, really good bar of soap. So start there, and then you can play around from there and, add a little bit more or a little bit less of things, see what you like, see what you don't like. You can do milk soaps, you can add oatmeal, you can add different plant elements. Know that adding plant bits is not going to give you a scent. The lye reaction is incredibly caustic, and it tends to eat fragrances. And so, you can do an infusion of mint from your garden, and you make a tea out of that, and you use that tea to mix with your lye water instead of regular water, and thinking that you're going to get this lovely minty soap. That lye is just going to eat those fragrance molecules in that mint, and it's not going to really come through. You can use all kinds of ground botanicals in your soap, and you'll have little flecks of it in your soap, but anything that's green tends to turn brown because of the alkali environment and just the drying out over time. And so you don't tend to retain a lot of color. And so it's fun to incorporate those things, but a lot of times I think of it more as label appeal than anything else. If you were to do a blind test of a soap with a bunch of different fancy from the garden additives and then just a plain Jane bar, and somebody couldn't see the color and was just using it in a sink, I would bet that they would be hard-pressed to tell the difference. So a lot of that stuff is fun. I've done pumpkin soaps, I've done all kinds of different things over the years. But the reality is it's mostly label appeal. And honestly, I feel that way about milk soaps. There are people that will swear that goat milk soap is the only thing that's helped them with XYZ. And for them, that may be the case. But in my experience, I have never used a milk soap that I thought was any better or any worse than an all vegetable soap or a soap made with lard or tallow. And I think mostly it adds some extra fat in addition to what you would normally have in there. And so it leaves a little bit more extra conditioning on your skin. And you may love that, you may hate that. My skin is notoriously dry, and generally what I need is a good lotion that is going to hold moisture against my skin. I can put straight oil of any different kind. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's cocoa butter and shea butter, or whether it's olive oil, or you name it. I can put that directly on my skin when my skin is dry and itchy, and a half an hour later I am still itchy, because what my skin is craving is not actually oil. It's not an oil issue, it's actually a water issue. And please don't tell me to drink more water. Yes, I've heard that for the last 30 years of my life, and I probably easily drink 64 ounces of water a day plus other beverages. So it is not a hydration issue for me personally. It's just how I'm designed. And when I am in a humid climate, so if I get to go to Hawaii or if I'm down in Florida, I am like a frog or a lizard who is just sucking up the moisture out of the air, and my skin is so happy. And unfortunately, I've spent almost my entire life living in dry Western climates where the humidity is well under 50%. But yeah, I think that a lot of label appeal is fun, but I don't think it actually brings a significant difference to bars of soap. And that is after 20 years of making soap myself, and also at least 10 years of being on all kinds of soap making forums, both on Facebook and on Yahoo before that. So you do what makes you happy. If you have access to dairy, like you have a home dairy, and so you've got access to cow milk, or you've got access to goat milk, go for it. Absolutely. It's definitely worth doing and worth trying and playing with. Do I think it is worth seeking out goat milk at, what can be easily $10 for a half a gallon? Or going to the grocery store and seeking out canned goat milk, or goat milk in the refrigerated section for paying a pretty penny because you think it's going to be vastly superior in soap on your skin? No, I do not. But that's just my personal opinion, and your mileage absolutely may vary. And I know there are probably people who are going to watch this video who are going to very much disagree with me. But that's just my experience. Okay, so that's kind of my things I wish people knew about soap making before they started, and I'll give you some recipes for homemade on the Homestead soaps. I will say I did a batch, this was quite a few years ago now, but I did some single oil soap tests where I made small little bars of soap with a whole bunch of different kinds of oils and butters, with only one type, just to be able to compare them side by side and see which ones I liked and how they behaved, and et cetera, et cetera. And my favorite single oil soap of all the ones that I did make was Tallow. And so I actually do think in a, come the revolution kind of scenario where we're not able to access the ingredients that we're used to getting from the store, like coconut oil, for instance, that homemade 100% tallow soap is actually quite good. It's not as good as a tallow soap that has some olive oil and some coconut in it, but it is definitely acceptable for a homestead if you needed to do it that way. Side note, Kevin Dunn, who wrote this wonderful book called, I'll put it up on the screen, I'm blanking on the name right now. He's a chemistry professor who teaches chemistry in college by using soap making as the way of learning chemistry. How cool is that? He's done some really fun myth busting over the years about different things that come up in soap. He's the one who actually helped figure out what DOS, or dreaded orange spots, actually was. But he has a great piece on making soap from wood ashes, where he talks about what that is. And I'm just going to read this because I will get it wrong if I don't read it directly. So the active ingredient in wood ashes is potassium carbonate. The traditional way to get a hydroxide is to react wood ashes with lime, calcium hydroxide, or slaked lime. Reacting wood ashes with calcium hydroxide produces potassium hydroxide. And remember, I said potassium hydroxide is what's used for liquid soap, not for solid soap. To get sodium soap from potassium hydroxide, you add salt once the cook is done. Sodium soaps are less soluble than potassium soaps, and so they float to the top. And this is all a hot process soap making, not cold process. Cold process is what I'm going to show you. So this is the classic, you think of your grandma with a cauldron out in the backyard making soap. Part of what was happening is those sodium soaps, when they added salt to the solution, would float to the top of that cauldron and could be skimmed off. So if you have 1,000 pounds of wood and you burn it, you're going to get about 5 pounds of ash. And from that, you're going to get 1 pound of potash, which is potassium carbonate. So do I think that I want to try to figure out how to make soap from wood ashes? No. No, I do not. It is definitely something that can be done, but it is not easy. And, part of the biggest problem with that is you don't know the exact concentration of the lye that you're making, regardless of what type of lye it is. And so you're doing a little bit of this in terms of guessing on how much oil to add, whether or not it's going to be lye heavy or not. And so, yeah, it can be done. Personally, I'm hoping that I have enough banked sodium hydroxide, which lasts forever as long as it stays dry, that I can basically make enough soap for myself and my family that I'm good for the next 20 years, and that I don't ever have to try to figure out how to make soap from wood ashes. So that's my 2 cents on that. All right. What video I haven't showed you already as an overlay to me talking, I will show you now. And soap making with tallow or with lard. Let's get started. If you have questions about soap making, feel free to leave me a comment below. I also have several blog posts on soap making, and I will leave links to that in the description. But thanks for watching, tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment or share. I have new content coming out every week.